from.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Tackling Sport podcast. It's Daniel here, joined once again by my brother Sean.
How's it going?
First, you want to give a big thanks to anyone who's listened to the show so far. We really appreciate the feedback we've gotten, and also last week we reached a milestone of over 2,000 unique downloads. So we're delighted to keep bringing you the show. We're going to continue with the Monday to Wednesday episodes. So for example, this Wednesday we've got David Coldrick, a former All-Ireland final referee, coming in to talk all things GA in terms of recent rule changes. So we're looking forward to bringing that to you. So yeah, Sean, how was your week?
Yeah, all good. Training away. Looking forward to Championship next Sunday. Going for swims now after training with the lads, which is something I really enjoy. It's something really worth doing if you've open water near you to get out and loosen the legs. So yeah, looking forward to Sunday and our Championship game, and great to see the GA return, even if it's on a limited basis.
Yeah, we had a challenge game last week, and I presume similar to a lot of other GA clubs, we had a number of injuries, either small injuries and a couple of major ones as well. So it just goes to show, when you haven't played in 4 or 5 months, it's, you know, unfortunate for lads that they come back and then just whatever happens, they're just not used to the movements, and a fair few injuries. Like.
And you, there's a return to being a nets on the cards for you, Dan.
Yeah, we need Casey back fit ASAP. Anyway, moving on. This week, Sean, what we got lined up?
Yeah, we speak to Jerry Kiernan, former Olympian in 1982. We'll talk to him about athletics, how he got into it, his time with RTE as a pundit, and obviously the most important bit, what we were like as students in his 6th class. Quite an interesting chat about, also include doping and sport, which is something we covered in our golf show as well. So it was great to speak to Jerry again and reminisce on some of the old times.
Yeah, so stay tuned, as Sean mentioned, for the doping in sport. I know it was kind of a good segue with the golf last week that we brought up with Jerry, and we also speak about that positive test in Carlo GA as well, and what the kind of wider implications potentially are of that. So yeah, let's get to the interview. Great chat. Delighted to welcome to the podcast today Dublin Marathon winner 1982, 1992, Olympic 9th place in 1984, a 4-minute miler, a member of RT's athletics coverage, but most importantly, myself and Sean's 6th class teacher. Jerry Kiernan, welcome to the podcast. How are we?
Yeah, nice to be here, boys.
Thanks for joining us, Jerry.
Not at all, Sean. Not at all.
Jerry, first of all, just talk to us a little bit about growing up in Kerry and how you got into running.
Well, I grew up in Kerry, as you say. Initially, I spent the first 4 years of my life in a little village called Ballylongford. My dad was a gardener, so we were transferred to the Stole, which is a bigger town 9 miles away. And my early memories are, it was a particularly happy childhood in a way. The school was about half a mile from me. And, you know, I started off in infants, and I used to run to school in the morning time, run home at lunchtime, run back to school afterwards and home afterwards, and then spend some time in the back roads with my mates. So at the age of 4, I would have been running 4 and 5 miles a day. Now, you two boys, when you were going to school, your mum and dad brought you to school because it was too dangerous to do otherwise. But we used to kick football out in the streets because there was no cars. And I realised at a very, very early age that not alone could I keep running and running and running, I also realised that I actually loved running. And I used to go for runs on my own, out the road, out towards the village of my van, or out towards the village of Ballylongford. And nobody else was doing it, but I just loved doing it. But I also loved playing other sports. I mean, I was big into Gaelic. I loved soccer. We made a fist of other sports. We used to play rugby out in the streets, that kind of stuff. But in 1964, I saw the Tokyo Olympics. And I was in my next door neighbour's house. And there was a bank official lodging in that house. His name was Ollie Lahan. Now, Ollie Lahan has since died. He had a horse that was second, third twice in the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, a horse called Oscar Schindler. He died of motor neuron disease a few years back. But I remember him explaining the whole thing to me, and I was absolutely mesmerised. And at the age of 11, I said, that's actually what I want to do. I want to run in the Olympic Games.
Wow. And then taking it from there, did you get involved in a club then from there on, or how did you kick on that?
Yeah, shortly afterwards, when I went to secondary school, which is the local school, what was it, 12 or 13, was 2 teachers there, Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Mullen, my Latin teacher and my Irish teacher. They set up a club. So we had actually quite a vibrant club. Now, you must understand that back then, we were always out in the streets doing something. I mean, we were always down in the square or in the back roads playing soccer. Gaelic football was organised for us on the weekend. We were always out. But for me to actually focus on the running when I could have done something else, and particularly at the age of 14 or 15, in some races when I got some right hidings, and I said to myself, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. I had the opportunity to do other things because it was pretty handy at football and pretty handy at soccer as well. But it always stayed with me, the running. So when I came to Dublin in 1971, I went to St. Pat's in Drumcondra, and Clonliffe Harriers with the athletic stadium was 2 miles up the road. So I jumped in the bus one day and jumped in the 16A bus, went up and went into Santry and said I want to join the club. And that was the start of it for me. And I remember clearly in my first few months in St. Pat's, a car came to St. Pat's, a taxi, to drive me all the way down to the store for a Gaelic football game. And I told them, no, I wasn't interested. I really wanted to run. And nobody in the store could actually understand that. But for me, it was absolutely everything. And coming to Dublin first and having a bit of freedom, 19 and 20, I probably was a little bit wild on occasions. But the dream of actually running a sub-400 mile, running in the Olympics, it never, ever left me. Never.
Speak about that dream there. So you say the 4-minute mile and running in the Olympics, and both things you achieved. How did you have two dreams so not separate apart, but two different areas of running? Obviously, with a quick mile and then a marathon.
Well, I wanted to have three. I mean, I had three ambitions. I also, at a very early age, I actually also wanted to be a teacher. So, but to answer your question directly, I ran a sub-400 mile in 1976. I mean, I was 23 years of age. But as you get older and you run more miles, you tend to gravitate towards the longer distances. So that when 1980 came along and the Olympics were run in Moscow, I just missed out on the 5K team. And then when 84 came along, I reckon inspired by the Dublin City Marathon, because I saw my friend Neil Cusack winning it in 1981. And I said to myself, well, I can beat him in any distance. And so I won it in 1982, and then that's the reason why then I went down the road of running marathons. But in 1976, Daniel, if you had asked me, if you want to run the marathon in two Olympic cycles time, I'd say, not a chance, because I actually viewed myself as a miler. But as I got older, I got stronger. And I used to jump on the roads, and I'd run a 10-mile road race in 46 or 47 minutes. And I suddenly realized this is actually what I'm best at. I was capable of running hard and fast over longer distances. I didn't quite have the speed for the mile. Now, I was a sub-400 miler. I did it in June of 76 on a terrible day in Crystal Palace. It was probably worth, I did just run 3:59.12. Now, it was probably worth about a 3:56, and maybe I could have run a 3:55 at my best. But the world record was 3:43. That's 13 seconds behind. That's being in a different parish. So even though I was delighted to do it, and I would actually maintain that running the sub-400 mile was my best achievement, because I really, really trained hard. I wasn't a natural miler, but it's something I really wanted to do.
I never realised that for you winning that Dublin Marathon in 1982, it took to the year before and seeing people that you'd run with and you knew were better than for you to believe that you could, for example, win the Dublin Marathon that year.
Yeah, well, you see, kind of what happens is this, and you and Sean will find the same thing, that various things will happen to you in the course of your life, and it will make you stop and think about things. I don't know what it could be, but for me, I remember one time being up in Gormanstown with Neil Cusack, who won the Boston Marathon, and him and I went for a 10-mile run up to Bettystown and back down by the beach. And when you're around with Neil Cusack, you have to fasten your seatbelts just because he ran hard all the time. And I remember for the first 5 or 6 miles, he dropped me by 10 meters, he dropped me by 15 to back up. By the time the run was over, I had him in my fist. I knew I could run away from him. And when the dust settled, when I began to reflect on that, I said to myself, well, if he can do all the things he's doing, I can do more besides. And that's what gave me the belief. And as I say, things will happen to you two boys in the next number of years. And it might actually change your direction in life. Hard to say what it is, but these are the experiences we have as we go. grow up.
And is that something, Jerry, that you'd credit just solely down to your own mental side of the game, or?
I would say, Daniel, that's very, very important. Sean, because the thing is, I wouldn't have had a lot going for me in terms of running. I mean, I'm 6'1". I had a very, very, very short stride in relation to my size. I had a long back, and my back was always very stiff. So when I used to play Gaelic football, I mean, any scores I got were in the second half. It used to take me an age to warm up, an age. I was just generally stiff. But what I had going for me was, I think, a very, very, very strong heart and lungs, cardiovascular system. Now, that's purely a fluke, by the way. I mean, I take no credit for it because that's in my genes. You know, it's in my genes to do these things. And if I was to say, well, you know what? I can keep going and I can run hard and my heart and lungs are as good as anybody's anywhere. For me then not to do something about it, that would have been bad. That would have been not the right thing to do. So, you know, I'm never inclined to give the likes of Usain Bolt credit for being great. I'm never inclined to give the likes of Messi them great credit for being great because they're actually genetically programmed to be great. And then you make the best of what you have then.
And then moving on then, so you'd won the Dublin Marathon in 1982. Did you straight away have the goal of in 2 years' time, I want to run the Olympic Games in LA, 1984?
That evening time with my coach, there was a reception in a nightclub called Buck Whaley's, and we were in there having a beer, and the coach says, right, the Olympics in 2 years' time. That was the goal. Yeah, it was born that day. I mean, when the race was over, even though I was crippled from the experience, I knew I would recover, and I became a marathoner then. Only at that point, because the Dublin City Marathon in 1982 was my first marathon. I'd been running fast 10 miles, fast half marathons, fast 25Ks, but I'd never ran the 42K. You know, so for me, it was an epiphany. It was a huge learning experience. So I switched over then. I made the mental adjustment. I'm no longer a track runner. I am a marathon runner.
And then talk a bit about the Olympics experience, so the build up to it and then actually running in the race.
Well, the build up to it, I won the trials in Cork, even though I was disqualified in the race because I was wearing a t-shirt. I was wearing a running vest, which was handed to me by Adidas. Said, wear this, and I wore it. But at the time, apparently, I had contravened IWF ruling on advertising. I hadn't a clue what was happening. I just wore what I was given. With the benefit of hindsight, I guess it was a bit of a setup because it generated at the time a lot of publicity. But even though I won the race, it was also our national championships. And though I won the race, I was disqualified from the national championships. So the record won't show that I won the national marathon championships, even though that year, a few weeks before it, I won the national cross country. And I do believe that I would be the only person to have won the national cross country and the national marathon in the same year. Now I stand corrected in that. That's what I think. But
and when did you find out you were going to get disqualified from that in terms of?
I got a phone call from my brother Mike, and he says to me, "It's a bit exciting in town," because I was out in the Silver Springs Hotel with my folks chatting away, and so you know, there was a bit to do about it at the time, but you know, they were never not going to pick me. I mean, I had to be picked. I often reckon, though, Daniel, had I finished second, they wouldn't pick me because I did have a very ropey relationship with the association. The association was basically run by two people back then, and I just didn't get on with them because they were not, to my mind, they were not interested in the well-being of athletes. They were interested in their own position, their own power in the association, so I wouldn't play ball. So it was important that I actually won, and I only won by 7 seconds.
And just on that last thing on that relationship, were there other athletes that thought the same back then in terms of those two guys? Or
maybe not, but I just didn't like being told to do certain things that were not in my interest. So I just wouldn't do it.
And then, Jerry, you'd qualified from St. Pat's as a primary school teacher. And then how does that work then after 82 when you win the Dublin Marathon to then go, right, in 2 years' time, I want to go for the Olympics, and you're a teacher at that time. Tell us about how that worked.
Well, Sean, every time I come into you and Daniel in the morning time, I had already done 5 miles. Okay? Wash, shower, have my breakfast, walk to school. And then in the evening time, then I would run at least 12, sometimes 15, and then do my long runs then at the weekend. Now, you guys live very close to Kerry and the chimney and the lead mines down there. I used to spend half my time running around the hills up there or up in Leopardstown Racecourse. So everywhere I ran, I mean, there was nowhere flat. I mean, I wasn't running in Holland. This was in dead flat. I was either up or down, or I was in long grass. But I particularly picked these places because they were tough places to run, and I reckon it would make me tough. So it was important for me to do all the things that I felt I actually needed to do. So for those 2 years, and even after the Olympics, you know, clock would go off 6:45. I'd be out for running 7 o'clock. I'd be in school at 9 o'clock. I would come home and I would sleep for maybe half an hour, and then I would be back out again for another run. And this went on actually for years. But it was part of my life. Looking back now, I don't believe I was making any kind of sacrifice. This is what I felt I actually had to do, because I was running against people who were doing the same things as me, and maybe even more besides, but they were doing nothing in between. I mean, in my Olympic year, I was teaching 44 children. You know, in the old part of the school, and you guys would know, up in room 2. It's a small room, 44 kids and myself. You know, we were driving each other crazy. And it was a difficult situation, but I thought nothing of it at the time, because I couldn't change anything, and it was my livelihood, and bills had to be paid. I had 2 children of my own at the time as well. But I was the only person in the top 20 in the Olympics that actually worked. Nobody else worked. So looking back on the whole thing, do I realise I was at a significant disadvantage? And occasionally I often wonder what would have happened had I not been working, where I ran in the morning time, I ran in the evening time, and I lay flat on my back for the bits in between, reading a book or just chilling out.
And then, so on your Olympic time of 2:12, I read somewhere in 1984, would have got you in the top 10 in every single Olympics since. So it was obviously a high quality Olympics final.
It was, but it's reckoned to be the best. It's reckoned to be the best because everyone was there. I mean, nowadays you have people running in the Olympics, and they're also could be contracted to, let's say, the New York Marathon, the Chicago Marathon, and the Berlin Marathon. And if things are not going their way, they'll drop out. Whereas back then, there was none of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, everybody was Salazar, Lopez, the 3 Japanese who were all 2:8 guys. I mean, everybody was there in that particular race. And 2:12:19, that was my fastest time. And that was done in 85-degree weather. That was, I mean, it was a Sunday afternoon at 5:15, and the sun was baking down on top of us. And I would reckon, Daniel, that performance in 84 would have gotten me a medal in 1980. Because second and third in 1980, I beat them easily in 1984. I know it's 4 years down along the line, but they're speaking the same age as myself, you know. But that's the whole nature of it. I mean, Coughlin was the best runner in the world in 1979. He was sick before the Olympics in 1980, you know. So when you have Olympics on every 4 years, I mean, it may not be your peak. Your peak may be the year before. Your peak may be the year afterwards. And what is actually significant about this Olympics this year is there are people who won't have won this year in Tokyo that probably won't win next year because they're just that little bit beyond their sell-by days. I mean, I was convinced after 84 that I would win a medal in 88. Didn't even make the team in 88.
And just on that, so in terms of the rest of your marathon career post-Olympics, so you ended up winning the Dublin Marathon in 92.
I won the Dublin Marathon in 82. I won a big marathon I won a big marathon in Stamford, Connecticut. I think it was 86. I was third in the Houston Marathon in 86 as well. I was also third in the Columbus, Ohio Marathon, and I won the New Jersey Waterford Marathon. That was a particularly big one. That was in 87. And then we had the trials in 1988, and the trials didn't go well for me. And then I had Dublin then in 1992. So I won 2 Dublins 10 years apart. But then at that stage, Daniel, I mean, I was nearly 40. You know, I was only 6 months off my 40th birthday. And I was actually getting a little bit tired of it all because, you know, I've been I mean, I've been running since I was 10 years of age. You know, I've run about 300,000 kilometers, and I just felt that, you know, I didn't have quite. I remember being in America in might have been 1987, in the autumn of '87, and marathon in America started at 7 o'clock in the morning, which means you get up at 4 o'clock and you walk around the place, you get the body away. I remember getting up and thinking, you know, that particular career was over. Now, the problem is this: is you have to deal with that as well, because there are always psychological issues, either major or little, with realizing that your career is over. And indeed, a number of people who find their careers slipping will actually go down the road of actually taking drugs and stuff like that, just to keep it going, just to keep the buzz going. Because, you know, it's kind of daunting when you realize that the things you took for granted 3 or 4 years previously are now becoming extremely difficult, if not impossible. You want it to go on and on and on.
And then moving then on to coaching, Jerry, did you always want to get into coaching, or is that something that only came after, like you said, the buzz of not running had stopped and you wanted something to replace it maybe?
You're right, Daniel. You're right. It was kind of organic. I mean, could I imagine 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that I'd be going to Belfast this evening, having 30 people up coaching those people? Probably not. But, you know, as I got older, people began to ask me advice, and I gave the advice. And then they kept asking for advice, and before you knew it, they were winning stuff. They were winning national titles, and then the more successful you are like that, the more people want to ask you to coach them. Now, we have a very informal situation in Belfield. I mean, if you two guys wanted to come up, there's no objection. I mean, anybody can come up, doesn't cost you anything, and there's a great buzz up there, and I must say I look forward to it. And there's all types of people up there. There are good people, and there are not so good people. But they're actually they're all friends as well. I mean, we are actually close-knit as well. So it's a hugely enjoyable experience.
And then in terms of your success there, I know in particular Kerry McGee gives a lot of credit for some of her success for you. Can you tell me a little bit about working with her and how that started off? Because I know that was a long road of recovery. She had an injury, I think.
Well, Kira had a very bad injury. She had an Achilles tendon injury. And she was traveling Europe in 2012 because she wanted to make the London Olympics. That would have been big, and you know, she as a result of all of these trips around the place and all these races, she had difficulty walking. Now, she's a tough girl, but she had to have an operation. And when the operation was performed in London, when her leg was opened up and the surgeon looked at it, he realised that there was far more damage there than what he thought beforehand. So there's a lot of rooting around to clean up the mess, if you wish. So post-operation, Kira was on crutches for a long, long time. I remember going for coffee with her in Randall and me walking beside her, and she was on crutches. And then after the crutches, she began to walk. And then when she was walking, then we began to walk up the Three Rock Mountain, you know, just strengthening the tendons, the calves, you know, because walking up and down hills is a terrific exercise. When I felt then that she was experiencing no difficulties, there was a park nearby in Rathgar. We used to go down there and she ran for a minute. She did exercises and she ran for a minute. And the following day she ran for 2 minutes. And then she ran for 3 minutes. And then 4. And before you knew where she was up to in half an hour. Now, she's never been injured since. I mean, that leg, it's always a little bit sore and she has to keep an eye on it, but it has never prevented her from running since. And that would have been going back to 2013, 2014.
And then Jerry, like when you were in school teaching me, especially, you would have had a lot of athletes, and then they would have gone over abroad to run. And how hard is that as a coach to keep track of, you know, your runners, the likes of Mark English, that when you're based here in Dublin and then they're racing, say, over in Germany or somewhere, how hard is that to keep track of making sure they're sticking to their programs?
Well, it's no problem at all, Sean. I mean, I know them all well. I trust them all. I just to give you an example. One of the girls was down in Ringsend this morning. Okay, she was our athletic program is starting up in a couple of weeks' time. So I gave her a spin over 800 meters, a time trial. Now, I couldn't go because I was talking to you boys, but the minute she was done, she picked up the phone and she told me exactly what she had done. And as it was, she actually ran a personal best. And she was buoyant, but I knew exactly. So when she finished at 12:30, she was on the phone to me at a minute past 12:30 to know exactly what she did. And that's what happens when they go abroad. I am the first person they talk to afterwards. Win, lose, or draw. So I know exactly what everybody is doing.
And just on that, in terms of coaching, Jerry. So obviously, people who are listening to this are familiar with football coaching, what's involved, tactics. In terms of yourself, are you focused on like technique, split times, tactics of a race, depending on what they have coming up, or how does it work? I know it's different for each athlete, but how does it work for yourself in terms of setting up a program?
Well, Daniel, what I do really is I first of all get them fit. I mean, I'm looking at these people now for a number of years. I get them fit, and I then try and place them in races where they're actually going to have a positive experience. I mean, the young one that ran the 2:12 for 800 this morning, she'll be around 2:09 during the summer, which would be great for her. But you wouldn't be advocating her going to the Olympics because it's still 9 seconds off the qualifying time. But you would put her into an environment where she is actually comfortable with, and you're saying you're putting her in a situation whereby if she was to win or do well, that is something a little bit better than she's done in all of her life. And that's what I expect, and that's what I would hope from all the athletes I coach, not to be an Olympic champion, but to be as best as one can be, and to actually appreciate that they're running at their best. Because when you take the health dividend out of running, or indeed any form of exercise, it could be Gaelic, it could be hurling, it could be soccer, it could be anything. There is a health dividend. But when you push that to one side, then a lot of athletes, they have expectations. You've got to harness those expectations, and you've got to quietly dampen the whole thing down. But at the same time, when they do something like Cheryl did this morning, tell her that was absolutely wonderful. Now, it's not wonderful to the best 800-meter girl in the world, but it was wonderful for her because she has never run as fast in her life than she did this morning down in Riversend on a very slow track. So she is absolutely buoyant right now, and that's what gives me the satisfaction. And tonight, when we're up in Belfield, there's a gang of 30. They're going to do a 10-kilometer tempo run. They don't know about it. I'll tell them 5 minutes beforehand, and they all have their PBs on that particular loop, and they'll be out tonight. The gun goes at 6:30, 6:25. I'll tell them what they're going to do, and then they have to deal with the psychological impasse of saying, crap, do I have to run a 10K tonight? Because everybody can run 16 by 400s. They're the easy sessions, but to run a 10K at tempo pace where you're practically flat out the whole way, it's not an easy session to do, but they're going to do it, so it'll be interesting. It's a bit of an experiment as well. But some of them will actually run PBs on that particular loop, and those are the ones who go home whistling tonight. They'll be in great form.
Just the last thing on that. So would you do that just so people don't have time to think, obviously, 5 minutes before? Okay, because otherwise, if it's raining or something, they wouldn't.
Precisely, Daniel, because we had a workout on Saturday, and when the workout was over, what are we doing next Tuesday? I normally tell them. And so you find out at 6 next Tuesday. And once I tell them something like that, nobody says to me, come on, tell us. But I know what they're like. They have themselves worried to bits. I told them on Saturday, you're doing a 10K on Tuesday evening. They know at the appropriate time. And it would be interesting to have a camera on them just to see the looks in their faces.
And speaking of cameras, Jerry, a lot of people listening would recognise you from RTE's coverage of athletics and so on. Tell us how you got into that, and did you enjoy it first of all, and tell us a bit more about it.
I will, Sean. I got into it. I remember being called in 1988. I was sitting at home and I was called in because Ben Johnson tested positive for taking some stuff off the 100 meter final. And I was called in to comment on Ben Johnson and why would he go down that road, etc., etc., etc. And then about 12 years later, I was down in Dean's Grange going into the bank, and Bill O'Hurley was coming out of the bank. And Bill stopped and he says, would you like to be part of the Olympics and in Sydney? I said, I would. And that's basically where it started. Then RTE got in touch with me, and I've been involved ever since. I really enjoyed it. I particularly enjoyed working with Bill. Again, I use the word organic. You never know what Bill's going to ask you. Sometimes you're around with people and they've got some things in their ears, and if somebody upstairs is telling them to ask me, or indeed Sonia, or Derek the question. And a lot of the times the questions are not the right questions. They're kind of boring questions. Bill never did that. You know, Bill didn't give a shit about who was upstairs telling him what to say. He just ignored them. He asked his own questions because Bill was enthusiastic about running, but he knew nothing about it. He knew nothing about it. So he was trusting that we were the experts. And it was the best way to actually have a show, because Bill viewed the whole thing as a show. And as we were counting down 10 seconds to go, Bill would always say, best of luck, let's enjoy ourselves. It's only a program. And that's the way Bill operates. So, you know, I enjoyed that bit. I found Rio very, very tiring. I found it actually a little bit tedious as well, because Rio was on at strange hours of the night. We were talking about stuff at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and you were wondering, was there anybody out there actually listening? You know, I mean, driving home from the studios, all you got to do was count the boxes out on the road, you know, up in Mount Marion or wherever. So I got kind of tired of it, and you know, I would say right now that my thinking is that that's the last of it. I won't be doing it again. I mean, I love doing it, but it was actually very tiring, and you know, but I used to be exhausted after it, because I used to take the view I needed to find out about every athlete that participated, whether it was some fella in the shot put, or somebody in the 100 meters of the pole vault or the triple jump. Everybody, I didn't want to get cut out, and so I used to do, perhaps maybe my research was too detailed, but I used to find it tiring, and I would be jaded after it all over. You know, you really did need a holiday because your head would still be buzzing from it a week or two later. So do you know what? If Tokyo goes ahead, and I'm not too sure it will, I'll be enjoying it from the comfort of my own city and just watching it and shouting at the television and listening to what people have to say about it.
Just on I know that the World Championships last year weren't covered by RTE, and they were held in Doha and Qatar. Did that play a part at all in kind of your thinking there too, or?
RTE haven't covered the World Championships since David Gillick was 5th or 6th back a while ago. I remember we had a young one, that Olive Lucknan, that won a World Championship gold. Was it 2011? She won it whenever it was on in Berlin. RTE didn't cover it. I had to ring a guy inside the RTE to say to him, because he was involved in the sports program for the radio. I don't even say, turn on your television, turn on Eurosport, because Oliver Lucknan is going to win the gold, and he knew nothing about it. That's RTE for you. You know, there's a lot of, to my mind, a lot of deadwood in there. They're not interested in lots of sports at all. You know, it's when they're covering Gaelic and rugby and soccer, they don't really care that much about the other sports. Now, they have to cover the Olympics and they have to cover the athletics, and they do a good job on that. But the athletics is the centerpiece of the Olympic Games. You know, otherwise, they are not really particularly interested. They'll send cameras down to Wicklow for a Gaelic game, but they won't send cameras to the national cross country.
And do you think that plays a part at all in, say, you know, a lot of Irish people's interest in athletics? Because, you know, obviously with the Gaelic, rugby and football being the main sports, I suppose if RTE did give it a platform and maybe made a bit more deal of the Irish National Championships, for example.
Daniel, you're absolutely dead right, because there was a time when athletics was very, very popular. Growing up in Kerry, there used to be a meeting on up in Santry, the climate meeting, every summer. And I used to know people from the village I was born in, a little place called Rosna, who used to leave the village and go to Dublin just to see the Australians and the New Zealanders. and the place would be absolutely packed. The same thing as well, of course, was when Shamrock Rovers would play Shelburne when they were down in Middletown. You'd have queues down the Middletown Road. Now, people are not inclined to go out. People are inclined to simply spectate at home. But you're right. If we made a bigger deal, I mean, I cannot. But I understand because RTE are putting on sports because they're giving the people what they actually want to see. But some of it is at such a low standard. You still get the viewership, but it's at such a low standard. You're promoting something which is basically very, very low, the lowest standard of, and if it was possible to measure these things. And then you'll have good runners then, you'll have good runners and they are plying their trade and they're never mentioned. Just an example, one of the guys I coached, John Travers, he's run 13:28 for 5K. That's the fastest time anybody has run in Ireland. An Irish person for the last 4 or 5 years. He was abroad last year 5 times out of his own pocket. Every inter-county footballer gets money. Every inter-county hurler gets money. None of them are remotely his standard. He has to pay out of his own pocket. That's the situation we live in.
And do you think someone like, even if you look back to Sonia and the buzz that was around Sonia and people tuning in to watch the races, do you think athletics and RT could have kicked that on and kept the buzz going around that?
Good question, Sean. Problem, Sean, is you need a Sonia all the time. You need a Sonia, you need a Dervla Rook, you need a John Tracy, you need a Eamon Coughlin. You need these people all the time. Now, there were very good people. I mean, there's the likes of Mark Carroll, 351 miler, 13 minutes for 5K. He was playing his trade in all the top races in Europe. RTE never covered any of these things. You would never, ever, ever get to hear about these things. So you needed a Sonia, because I remember when Sonia was in the Olympics, and nobody was out in the streets. They were all indoors watching it. It was the same as well when you look back on the Jack Charlton years. And I think of the excitement. Everybody was indoors. But when we don't have success, visible success, you don't get the coverage. Now, with people operating at a very high level, but in something like athletics, where you're up against the Kenyans, the Eastern Africans for distance, the West African diaspora for sprints and stuff like that, it is almost impossible. Very rarely are you going to have success. I mean, if we win medals in next year's Olympics, and it might seem like a churlish thing to say, but it's not, it is so, we will win medals in non-competitive sports. They're not worldwide. They're not. Athletics is. Soccer is. Those are the 2 sports that are actually worldwide. Hockey is. What else? Those 3 sports. Swimming is worldwide as well. That's why they're so difficult to win. But if you take the other sports, and I suppose if we wanted our goal to be just simply winning medals, because lots of people are talented in a lot of sports. It's a question of catching them young and saying, come here, forget about running 1,500 meters, because you're up against this and that, the other thing, but you know what, you might be good at the modern pentathlon or something like that. That's an easy sport to win a medal. Very few people actually do it, and some countries organize themselves like that. The Australians, who probably have never had a snowfall in their lives, they've won medals in the Winter Olympics because they have seen what's involved, what's required to win a medal, and they've taken people out of sprints and this and that, and they said, you know what, if you're a good sprinter, you're quick off the mark, you can do the luge or whatever, and they've won medals like that. So that's the situation. But look, I've been griping about this for years. We don't get anything like the coverage that we deserve. And then it's easy to get cheesed off then when you look at some of the stuff that's on. And these are people that haven't achieved an awful lot at all, and yet they're up there at Mount Olympus with the gods.
Just one thing, right? So in lockdown, I don't know if it's particularly big on social media. A lot of people were doing 5K runs, for example, that never did 5K runs. So I'm talking about the likes of ourselves actually got big into running, which is brilliant for running. And even if you go out in Dublin now, I've noticed a lot more runners since, just because of lockdown. is there any way athletics or somewhere high up can use that bit of buzz about running? So, for example, as soon as you mentioned that 13:28 time, I think from John Travers, I was thinking my own 5 time, going, geez, going absolutely a different parish away. But it's good. I know now how good a time that was. Where if you told me 3 months ago, I'd have been like, "What? That doesn't mean anything to me." Do you think is there any way athletics can somehow use that as a springboard to kind of get a bit of buzz back about?
I think so, Daniel, and you're absolutely right, because if there was a road race up in Phoenix Park next Sunday over 5 miles, you would probably have about 4,000 people in the race. Now, most of them are not runners. I mean, they run the 5 miles and they'll be happy to do it, and it's a very, very healthy way. But to my mind, and a lot of the purists will say, they're not really runners. But I'm actually far more concerned with the people who are way down the ranks. They now know what they can do for 5 miles. They know what the very, very best can do for 5 miles. And so as a result of all these people running, I feel there is a greater appreciation of what the top fellas are doing. Also, as well, even though they're not much in terms of running, they have children. And when the children see their fathers and mothers running, it might give them the encouragement to do that. And it's something I've noticed during the lockdown, out walking about the place, the number of adults that were out actually running with their children. And you're thinking, no other when Sonia won her medal in 2000 in Sydney. Up in my club, Climate Farriers, the following Tuesday, there was an influx of boys and girls up in the place that wanted to run. Now, you lose most of them ultimately, because in running, particularly underage, the competition is fierce. And you have this notion that if you run all the time and train all the time, you're going to be great, you're going to be the best. But it doesn't happen like that. And oftentimes then, some kids can't deal with disappointment of actually, thinking they're good, come along, run the All-Ireland under 17 cross country, and find themselves finishing 158. And they say, I can do other stuff. Here I am, covered in shit. I finished 158. I'm not going to do this anymore. Whereas they're too young to realise that they keep at it. At 22 or 23, they may blossom. I remember running in the All-Ireland Intermediate when I was 19 and 20. I was nearly last. But, I won the national title aged 10 years later. So and Sean and Daniel, you probably would have heard this from me saying it. Look, when you're underage, whether you're playing soccer or tennis or whatever, and you get beaten, but it's something you want to do, keep at it. Keep at it, because you never know what way you will actually develop. But you're right, Daniel. If we had people up there, if there are people, years ago, I remember Tom O'Riordan used to write articles in the Indo every Tuesday and Saturday. That's gone now. I remember his son, Ian O'Riordan, used to write articles on athletics. He's now the GAA correspondent and athletics. That's what's happening. I'm not too sure we view sport at a very high level in this country. We look at the Minister for Sport. He or she has about 4 or 5 other portfolios. There's tourism, everything else. That's total bullshit. Sport is hugely important. If you want to do something about all those waiting lists, and you want to do something about all the people clogging up A&E, get everybody running. We'll have less problems in the future. Less problems. It's a no-brainer. But that's how sport is valued. And then I always feel that as long as Croke Park is packed in September, with the hurling and the football, and that's it, sport is fine, sport is grand.
And you talked about maybe this country needing another Sonia. Who do you think is probably next then to even get close to? Obviously, Thomas Barr was very unlucky not to win a medal. Is he probably the best to come, or has he peaked?
If you were to ask me, will we win any medals in next year's Olympics, providing the goes ahead, the answer is no. That we have nobody here. If you're looking at the people we've been relying on for the last number of years, talking about Thomas Barr, we're talking about Kieran McGeehan, we're talking about maybe Mark English. And of course, he used to be Robbie Heffernan in the walks. He's retired now. Will Mark English win a medal? He certainly has the talent to do it, but it's not going to happen, I don't think. It's not going to happen. Kieran McGeehan, she is world-class standard, but she's in the middle world class. There's too many girls ahead of her. There's at least 15, 20 girls ahead of her. Thomas Barr is in a situation whereby you have 3 athletes in the world who've actually broken 47 seconds for the 400 hurdles. Now, bearing in mind, they have 10 flights of hurdles to jump. Every hurdle is 1 meter high, and these 3 guys have run under 47 seconds. Now, Thomas run a smidgen under 48. Only 50 people in the whole wide world and in the whole duration of that particular sport have actually broken 48. So Thomas Barr is a world-class hurdler. But there's 3 away and gone. And then there's a whole bunch of Europeans as well. I could see Thomas making the final, but I really do believe that Rio was his time. His 47.90 something was incredible running, and he was beaten by inches by a Jamaican running for Turkey.
And just on Thomas Bard, so he's 47.9. That's his PB still, and he has to get to win a medal potentially. He'll have to get, did you say, under 47 seconds to?
Well, a few things will have to happen, Daniel. First of all, he'll have to improve. Now, it's possible he can, because he ran close to 47.90 something 2 summers ago. He ran 48.3, which is very, very good to win a medal in the Europeans, and he's a good championship runner. Now, this year, at the beginning of the year, he ran PBs indoors for 400 meters. He ran the low 46s. So over 400 meters, he ran faster indoors than he'd ever run in his life. So everything was pointing to the fact that he could run faster than 47.96. They're also relying, as well as those 3 people I'm talking about, particularly the likes of Carson Water. It's such a technical event, you're actually relying maybe in a way them getting their technique all wrong. Hitting a barrier, knocking them off stride, making complete balls of things, but the rest of it are falling down. But their technique is very, very sound. So then you're banking on maybe one of these people actually having an injury. Indeed, Thomas Barr himself gets injured on a regular basis. So there are so many factors involved. But I still think he's our best hope. He's our best hope of making the final. I wouldn't, it's a very, very, very big ask for him to win the medal. But you know what, making a final, top 8 in the world, people getting it wrong, their nerves getting the better of them, overstriding, whatever, hitting a barrier at force, falling down, these things happen all the time. We've seen it all the time. Who knows?
And obviously, Jerry, we spoke about your career there, and I just want to talk about your retirement. Obviously, you're big into coaching, and you're coaching lots of people. And how are you finding it? Obviously, I know you've a keen interest in Barcelona and also in Italy, in Montanelli, I think it was where you go over.
You're a good man, John. Yeah. I still go to well, I haven't been to Montanelli at all this year, and there's no prospect of it. I was in Montanelli a couple of years ago, and you know what? There was an outbreak of pneumonia in the place, and I picked up something out there, and so I had a respiratory situation, and I still have it to this day. Particularly during this particular lockdown. So I'm in no mad rush to go back at the moment. I need to be absolutely sure that everything has returned to normal back there. Wouldn't be at all in favor of jumping on a plane. But I miss Montanelli. I miss it, because then I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, sitting in the new camp, watching the warm-up, watching Messi and the boys, just thinking there's no place else in the world I'd rather be. The following day, then flying down to Milan and then taking the bus down to the village. That's the dream, So hopefully I'll be able to do it next year. Hopefully. Just
on Barcelona then, so for people that weren't aware, so you're actually a member of Barcelona, and you're a big supporter of them.
Huge, yeah. I'm a member since I say about 2005. I got into Barcelona. Look, I was always aware of the politics of Barcelona and the civil war and everything else. So I would always be drawn towards a club like Barcelona, whereas the likes of Madrid and them, no way at all, because they were purely associated with the Franco regime through maybe their own fault or maybe not. But I would have been drawn toward Barcelona. But when Sky started showing Barcelona back in the early 2000s, I was completely enamored with the way they played football. And I remember the Cruyff years in Barcelona as well. Now, at that point, I would have been a Spurs fan, a big Spurs fan. But when I was out in Barcelona 2 years ago and Spurs were playing in Barcelona, I wanted Barcelona to kill Spurs, even though we had qualified and we actually didn't need the points at all. I want Barcelona to win, and yet Spurs would have been my first love, from 1963, listening to a commentary on the radio. They were playing Atletico Madrid in the final of the Cup and they won 5-1. And I was a Spurs man from the age of 10 on. But Barcelona have taken up to the point that I'm going to have silly about the whole thing.
And just a final point before I finish up, I want to just touch on a little bit of the funding issue in terms of athletics. So go maybe back to Thomas Barr. He has, what supports has he got in place for his Olympic push? So at that elite level, is there enough push? And then moving down the ladder for athletes that aren't going to make world finals but are going to compete in the Olympics, what's the support schemes from the Irish Sports Council, for example? And is it adequate enough?
Well, you probably would need to ask somebody else about that, but I'll tell you what, I'll answer it as best I can. Thomas Barr, the likes of Thomas Barr and Kieran McGee, if things don't work out in the Olympics next year, they cannot say that they're well looked after. They're more than well looked after, absolutely. I mean, Kieran McGee is on 40 grand, so that's a lot of money. So there's no excuses there. She's making 40 grand. She's also contracted to New Balance. At the moment, I believe she's out in San Moritz training at altitude. Now, when she was with me, she was a student inside in Belfield, and she was training between classes. Now she's everything absolutely taken care of. So if she doesn't make it next year, it's because she wasn't good enough to make it. It would have nothing to do with the grants. Now, what I find, and I confess, I haven't read where the grants have gone this year or indeed last year. But up to maybe a couple of years ago, I'd often look at the grants and I'd say, I wouldn't give anything to that person. I'd give more to that. I mean, there was a time when Thomas Barr was getting nothing and his sister was. And it was clear that the talent was with him, So to my mind, well, I feel I could sit down with my buddy Alan McCormack and we could divvy up the money and we could make a far better job, generally speaking, than what's been done at the moment. And I would be inclined to get, the likes of John Travers, John Travers is a very good athlete. He's a good international athlete. He should not be out of pocket going abroad for races. He shouldn't be out of pocket at all. I mean, he's a very good standard of athlete. And there's more to life, Daniel and Sean, than the Olympics. I mean, there's the European cross country, supposed to be on in Dublin this year. It won't be on now. There's the European Championships. There's other stuff. Look at all the publicity that the golfers get, and they're playing a non-championship golf. I mean, if McIlroy is playing in a minor tournament down in Miami, we get to hear about it. It's a big deal. Not for running. So you know what? If it was more made of us, maybe more money would actually come our way.
Cool. And then last point, just before you finish up with a quick fire, I did want to quickly bring up in terms of doping in athletics and in terms of the worldwide, because a lot of people that don't watch a lot of athletics will just quickly, point to that as, oh, sure, why would I watch it? Is it still prevalent enough and how are they dealing with it if it is? I'm talking obviously worldwide here as opposed to Irish athletes.
Yeah, well, if you take Ireland as a microcosm, just Ireland. When was the last time a runner was caught drugs in Ireland? Years ago.
Oh, yeah. 90, but yeah.
Well, it's years ago. A young fella from Midlands, I'd say about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. You look at the people who've been nailed. It's not athletics. And this is something that people actually have to, that people have to realize. Sure, there is a problem in athletics. Sure, I can understand people watching the 100 meters and thinking, I wonder is that kosher? That's in every sport. Do people reflect like that when they see the rugby? Do people reflect on that when they see soccer games? When they look at the scandals attached to the Juve team, Operation Puerto in Spain, where the authorities refused to release the names of the owners of various blood bags? Do they look at golf? Do they look at what else? Tennis? All those sports. Every every sport worldwide has a problem. We test. Look at the amount of Kenyans that have been caught. Look at the amount of Ethiopians. Think how hard it is to catch an Ethiopian. You better go down there. You know, there is no will whatsoever to catch tennis players. They're there. There's no will to catch them. There's no real will to catch rugby. There's certainly no will to catch soccer. If there was serious testing to catch a whole bunch of boys as well, because a lot of people, for them, the Gaelic football boys would view winning an Irish championship as being the holy grail. And a number of people, a small percentage in all these sports, reckon, do you know what, we could take a shortcut here. And what are the chances of me getting caught? In Gaelic, very, very little chance, because there is practically no testing, and yet a number of them have been caught in the last few years. Can you imagine if they were really tested? Well, it might take the sheen off a lot of the stuff they do.
Yeah, just last one. So our episode last Wednesday, we covered a little bit of Bryson DeChambeau on the golf, and golf's probably lax approach to it. And I think even thinking of Gad, there was a Carlow player, a slightly suspicious case, and I think he just kind of under the carpet.
He wasn't suspicious. He was caught.
Sorry, he was caught, but the way he dealt with it, his statement was suspicious, I should say. Yeah.
Well, do you know what? I would be inclined to cut that fella a little bit of slack, because you know what? Well, I suppose, the thing about it is it's a human failing. It's a human failing. We cheat in our taxes and stuff like that. Some do, some percentage do, some people would never. But you know what? It's probably not the worst crime in the whole wide world. But I suppose by the Carlow boy being on stuff, he might have been keeping somebody else who was clean off the team. But nevertheless, it's not, he's not a mass murderer. The way they went on, you think he had murdered somebody. But it's there. It is a real issue, because people do take shortcuts. There's no doubt about it.
Perfect. So listen, Jerry, you've been great with your time. We're just going to do a couple of quick fires before we go. Quick fire questions. I was very interested in this now. So Barcelona to win the Champions League, or so we'll go with, or Thomas Barr to get bronze next year in Tokyo.
Barcelona have a better chance.
That's not answering the question. Go on.
We're actually very, very poor at the moment. We're very poor at the moment, but we are capable of good performances. Like 2 weeks ago, we beat Villarreal 4-1, and we were super. We were shite last week against Bayern. We were terrible. But you see, the new Champions League, the way it's structured, if we get by Napoli, and Napoli are playing well at the moment, we're playing Bayern Munich, it's a once-off. And it's in Portugal. It's a once-off. I wouldn't fancy us against Bayern Munich home and away at all, because Bayern Munich are very, very strong, and they run us ragged. We have better footballers, but they are physically so strong. Our transfer policy is shocking, absolutely. All we ever talk about is bringing in forwards. We need 1 or 2 midfielders, and we need a centre half, and we need a full back. It's obvious. It's obvious what we need. But nevertheless, once you have Messi, it's going to happen. And in once-off situations. So it's a long-winded way out.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, these quick fires are getting very long answers.
I know.
In previous
Sorry
interviews.
about that. Sorry.
No, it's good. So the answer is Thomas Barr. Just about.
No. I think Barcelona better.
Barcelona, trying to get you there. So on Barca then. So you mentioned Messi there. Are you going to keep him? Because I know there's been talk for the first time ever. Really, there's been talk for the first time ever now that he could possibly leave. He's a bit disillusioned.
Daniel, this talk has been going on for the last 20 years. They're talking about Messi leaving. They're talking about draining the River Shannon. These things have been going on. Messi is not going to leave Barcelona. Never.
Cool. I don't know if you knew off the ball we're doing like a Mount Rushmore, which was basically pick the best sports person from each county, and you got a couple of mentions in the Kerry. I want to know who's your best Kerry sportsman of all time.
Well, you know what? You've got to look at the likes of John Lennon, who won the World Mountain Championships. He's a tough fella. If you're talking to me about Gaelic football, I would say, to my mind, the best Gaelic footballer Kerry's ever produced was the corner forward John Egan from a number of years ago.
From Sneem.
That would be it. But at the same time, if you were to go down to Kerry and if you were to do a survey with people down there, who's the greatest sports people ever down in Kerry, nobody would pick a runner. They wouldn't do it because it's simply not part of their thinking. It would be a roll call of footballers. So if your question is who's the best Gaelic footballer that I've ever seen, it would be John Egan. What John Lennon did win the World Championship is way ahead of that, but that wouldn't be obvious to most Kerry people.
No, I think I read your quote about Paul Hessian before, and you mentioned to Michael Lester he would be in the runner for the Galway one, but he, for what he did over was it 100 meters to his best time 11 seconds or something. But
I mean, the fellow called Michael Donlan down in Galway, and Michael Donlan was probably a good Gaelic footballer, and by Gaelic football standards, he was actually quite quick. The locals had him running 100 meters in under 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Two white guys have ever run under 10 seconds, and it certainly wasn't Michael Donlan down in Galway. That's the bullshit that people go on with, and you have to kind of listen to this, and then you walk in the streets, and you say something negative about it, you walk in the streets, and these dogs will stop you, and they start shouting at you, what do you know, and then dogs abuse. Not allowed to have an opinion on these people at all,
Second last question before I get Sean in. What's the peak of your career? I think you might have mentioned it earlier on, but what's your proudest achievement, I guess?
Well, I suppose Daniel. Look, it has to be the Olympics in 1984 because a lot went on beforehand. It was incredibly hot weather. I was up against the very best, and you know what? I came away thinking that on my day, on a good day, I could run with anybody. But also, as well, my headmaster, Mr. Amara, that you would remember, Don Amara, he collected a lot of money from me beforehand, so that I was actually able to go out to San Diego, which is about 105 miles down the road, for 6 weeks beforehand and prepare in the heat. Because, I mean, you can imagine the hottest day here in Ireland. That's an everyday situation in Los Angeles in July and August. It's even hotter, much hotter. So that's what you were up against. Not only were you up against great African runners, where heat wasn't an issue for them, you were up against great runners. The likes of Salazar, the likes of Ikanga, Tracy, Charlie Spedding and others. That's what you're up against. So that has to be really my best performance. Yeah. But the sub-formula might give me huge satisfaction.
For me, first of all, for the local crowd, who was the best athlete you ever had in St. Bridget's?
Oh.
And it's probably not me or Daniel. I got asked to go to Santry to watch, not to compete.
And we've a lot of Bridget's listeners now with Jerry. So.
Sean, support was very important. There was a young fella years ago. I can't really think of his name. I remember being up in Leopardstown one day running around at a time when I was flying around. And usually when I saw somebody running on the race course, I'd chase after them. But I remember chasing after this fella, and he wasn't coming back to me. And his name was Daniel. That's his first name. And eventually I caught up with him. There was a kid from the other 6th class, and he was a natural runner. And I told him so. He went to Blackrock College, and they looked at him down there, and they made him into a pole vaulter. I was disgusted. They hadn't a clue what they were doing. He was a natural. There's a couple more boys as well in 6th class. They were very good, but they were also very good soccer players. One in particular was really good, but he wasn't temperamentally suited to running because he was sick before in Santry. You probably, would he be in your class, Dan or Sean? Or maybe he was in the other 6th class. He was beaten in Santry one day. He'd been on well beforehand, and he was beaten by a very good young fellow who ran for the club, and he was pretty disgusted with the whole thing, and he never ran. Now, he used to also play soccer for Joyce. It's O'Leary.
And Mark O'Leary, yeah. He's currently with the Dublin under-21 footballers.
Yeah, we've turned him to Ga now, Jerry. Jerry
Right.
delighted.
Yeah, but it's good that he's doing something. But he was really naturally talented. But what will happen with him now in the dance is he'll actually get big. They'll give him some stuff that will balloon him up, and then he gets slow. They want him big because he can take the hits. But he'll lose other things along the way. It's a shame, really. Gaelic is a waste of talent.
Jerry, listen, you've been amazing with your time. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Great to see you guys. Best of luck with this endeavour, okay?
Appreciate it. Cheers.
All righty.
Brilliant, Sean. We thank and really appreciate Jerry for his time there. So, Sean, really good chat there, I suppose. Starting off with Jerry, he, we talked about his journey to running, and from the age of 4 or 5, he was running distances that, myself, yourself, still haven't ran, to be fair.
That's obviously what it was like in rural Ireland at the time, with getting to school as a kid, and obviously he just found the love of running and found he was good from it. And then when he moved up to Dublin to study in St. Pat's in Drumcondra, he obviously probably got the facilities and the ability to then go and start taking it more seriously, and then obviously start competing in competitions and national competitions, and before you know it, you're tipped as a future Olympian. And obviously I didn't really understand and know how he went from being a 4-minute miler to then becoming a marathon runner for Ireland in the Olympics. So that was very interesting, how he came to terms with that, and obviously to run in the Olympics as an amateur while he was still teaching, and how he got his training in on the way to school was very interesting, and something you wouldn't see now. He talked about how like some Mark English and Kieran McGeehan are well looked after, and so obviously with Jerry, as an amateur, he didn't get the professional chance of it really, and he was the only runner in the Olympics in the top 20 to be an amateur. So it's very interesting how that came about, and then obviously his move towards coaching, how organically it came really. He was just giving people a voice, and before you know it, he's down in Belfield on a Tuesday, Thursday, and he's got 30-40 people out running with him. And professional sports people talk about how you can't replace that buzz, and Jerry talked about it there, but watching and nurturing people to compete is probably something that can slightly replace that.
Yeah, and he mentioned, so he's got a club in UCD, and we spoke with Jerry after, so it's Tuesday 6:30, Saturday 11, and I suppose the thing with a lot of people who are listening to this probably had a bit of a running buzz in lockdown and either kept that up or not. It's kind of a good way for people of all abilities or times to head down to Belfield. As Jerry said to us after, you'll always have someone to aim for. So I suppose it's good for him, and I like that. The 10k, or not telling them about the 10k time trial, because I don't think I'd have showed up if I knew that was happening, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, Jerry, he's always got something up his sleeve, but no, definitely something that we'll hopefully try and get down to as well, because it's free of charge. And Jerry's obviously, he's one of those people that he's so passionate about running and about athletics as a wider topic. But obviously then when he spoke about doping, it was very interesting as well, because when he talked about it in GA, obviously that Carlo test, it probably brings it home a bit more how easy, and obviously when Peter Larry spoke about how easy you can fail a test and what are the implications of it, and obviously in an amateur sport in Gaelic Games it's harder to pinpoint anything. But obviously now people watch athletics, and there's always the question mark of is she, are they on something, and it probably takes away from the integrity of it. You look at someone like Rob Heffernan, who came fourth at the time in London in 2012, and a couple of years later he wins a bronze. So there's always that taintedness towards athletics at the moment, but it's something that they're working hard, and in fairness to the governing bodies around it, they are trying to stamp it out, and they are very proactive in it.
Yeah, I guess it's to steal the old Donald Trump line, but it is the case, the more you test, the more you're going to find problems. And the likes of golf, if they're only testing athletes once a year, the reality is even if there isn't a problem, that's fine, but like, why aren't you testing more? That's the thing. But moving on to his RTE career, I suppose it was very interesting there that he kind of found the work tough, wanted to kind of stay on top of his brief, and I suppose he kind of happy to watch 2021 in the comfort of his city, as he was saying.
Yeah, it's like that. Well, I remember when Jerry was in school, and some of the research he'd be doing coming up to our European Championships or an indoor championships, researching every runner in the race, and it's probably hard then to do quite a relentless coverage. Obviously Rio, the time difference was a key factor in his lack of enjoyment, and then he just probably wants to enjoy the athletics more and enjoy seeing Irish runners compete. And obviously we mightn't see him around in 2021, but I'm sure he'll be somewhere in the media. And
he spoke very well about athletics, for example, and he makes a fair point that there's the Irish cross country national championships. Why are they not being shown? And then a club game from Wicklow is. And to be honest with you, as a Gal man myself, I find that very hard to disagree with, to be honest with you. And people might say, oh, there's no real interest in athletics, but you saw during lockdown the amount of people getting out for runs. And I think, as we mentioned, to the likes of that 5k time, suddenly you've got a time where you're like, Jesus, I didn't realise to the extent that like these lads are doing half the time I'm doing, and I think I'm doing okay. So it's good for people to have those targets, and I guess going forward, athletics, like we mentioned, is something that they can really try and push home. I think Jerry mentioned an idea of getting 5k runs or 5 mile runs in the Phoenix Park, and I think right now, obviously after lockdown restrictions, etc., that they'd get a real good crowd, and from all abilities can do the running, and if that pushes their son or daughter to start taking running, and like we mentioned, every now and again you need a Sonia Sullivan, Derville, or Rourke, to a large extent as well, David Gillock, Paul Hessian. You need these lads coming through now and again in order for the interest to keep growing in the sport.
Yeah, it's probably, we see a lot of clamour around the Sunday game, and why aren't there more cameras at a Division 4 game in the National League? But it's the same with cricket, and with sport I'm very passionate about. There's a lack of coverage in minority sports in Ireland, and it's very easy to say, oh, well, people aren't going to watch it. Well, people aren't going to watch it if it's not on the telly, if it's behind a paywall on Sky Sports or BT or whatever. So there's always that. But athletics, everyone... It's quite an easy sport to understand, and everyone come Olympic time or a World Championship time, everyone gets around it and watches it. Like I've watched every 100-metre Olympic race final. It's just part of sport in this country, and rugby probably struggled with coverage on RTE for a while, but now all of a sudden rugby got the coverage, and then all of a sudden more people are playing rugby. It's the same with Gaelic games. The League of Ireland probably struggles again with coverage. People aren't going to games because it's not there, and it's something that it's hard for RTE because they only have two channels to cover a lot of this. But this is where Air Sport and places and Air Sport and Virgin Media and channels like that can really take control of the market and try and showcase more sport, more minority sports, and seeing is believing. To be young kids to be able to watch regular sport on the telly.
Yeah, and I suppose the last thing to say on RTE, it's not RTE's job to show whatever gets the most viewership. At the end of the day, they're taxpayer funded, and the likes of the national cross country championships, if they're not being shown, if the likes of the World Athletics Championships aren't being shown, it's their job to bring that to us.
And if RTE are covering these events, there's more money, there's more sponsorship in the game to help grow athletes, to be able to send a Mark English or a Keir McGeehan over to Dubai for a training camp. That's what it's all about, trying to get money into the sport, into sponsorship, into scholarships, and you get that through TV coverage, and it's a huge part, and hopefully it's something that we'll be able to see more and more of.
Yeah, when I run my 13:27 or whatever time Mark Travers 5k run, I don't want to be paying my way to Australia to go to a race, I'll tell you that much. But listen, we appreciate Jerry, really fascinating chat. And yeah, if you're interested in UCD, he said Tuesdays at 6:30, kick off with meeting at 6, and Saturday at 11. That's up in UCD Belfield. So we appreciate you listening in. As ever, we really appreciate feedback on Apple Podcasts if you're listening, and subscribe to all other platforms, or like and follow as well, so you don't miss an episode. On Wednesday, we've got a great inter-county referee chat with David Coldrick. David's a former All-Ireland football referee, and we speak to him about recent rule changes, and Sean will be in the hot seat there as I've done a bit of reffing myself, so you'll have a couple of questions for me anyway.
I have a few questions about referees that I'm hoping to get into now, but thanks to David for joining us. We're looking forward to that on Wednesday, and make sure to tune in.
Yeah, and I have a few myths to debunk to all you players who think you know it all about referees. So looking forward to getting looking forward to that. So last thing to say is just appreciate you guys listening. Get Tackling Sport on social media at Tackling Sport, or send us an email, editor@tacklingsport.com. It's goodbye from Sean.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me.
Slán go fóill.